So this is going to be a video on how basically the difference between resistance on speakers, on their sound systems, and voltage works. So resistance basically works on, I don't know what the principle of it though, but I think it's that it uses a certain amount of resistance for it. And if you want to put speakers in series, it's not the best idea for resistance, because you can actually hurt the amplifier by doing that. Just on a little note something, my Boggin amplifiers, these two right here, what's weird about them is that they actually have an 8 ohm and 4 ohm output. And 8 ohm and 4 ohm, that would be your resistance. But then you'd have voltage. Now that's usually used in stores, because you have a bunch of speakers. Now it's all running a mono channel. So if it's a mono channel, you're going to have a resistance. You're not going to have resistance there. So what you're going to do is you're basically going to have that. But then, yeah. So the way voltage works. Oh, I'm going to first summary about there's 3 different voltages that are common. There's a 25 volt, which is what you'd use in like a Shoppers Drug Mart or something. A very small building, like a card store or a restaurant. A restaurant's a good application. So a restaurant is when you'd have voltage, for your sound. Now 70 volt is when you'd have a supermarket or something like that. You could have, if it was a fairly big one, you'd probably have 2 amplifiers running 70 volt, or just 1 amplifier running 70 volt for the whole building. So 70 volt is for bigger applications, like very big buildings, like just basically one floor of a big office building, 1 floor. You could run say at 3 floors or so, maybe half of a big skyscraper that would be an office building. That would be about 70 volt for 1 amplifier. So that would be one of these. These are HTA, you already know the model, HTA 250A. These amplifiers can put a maximum of 70.7 volt output. So you could use one of these on average, about, not an office building, but you could do basically a small factory, a medium-sized factory. That would be like a bread factory. I've seen the size of a bread factory, and it's not very big. It's pretty small. It's too small for 25 volt. So 70 volt is when you use for factories. Now 100 volt is when you get into the areas of Toyota. I've been since I live in Canada. I've been as a trip for grade 4 this year. Actually last year, because this is the new year. So in 2011 of grade 4, I went to a trip of Toyota, which was last year. And the building was frickin' huge. All the robots, like half of the building was robots, and then you see this one big frickin' assembly line, you're like, oh, they're all the humans. We're also the humans. Anyway, so that's when you get into the 100 volt column. That's when you'd use a bigger voltage output. Now you'd have, so this is how voltage works. Basically, inside these amplifiers is a frickin' huge transformer that takes the resistance output and it steps it up to a voltage, either 25, 70, or 100 volts. And if it's a multi-output amplifier like this, you'd have one big transformer with different outputs. So you'd have the direct 8 ohm. So I think the 4 ohm would run 25 volt. 8 ohm would be 70. I'm not sure. And you'd have the 8 ohm or whatever you have into the transformer. You'd feed it out to 2 different outputs, your 70 and 25 volt outputs, and then that would go to your terminals. And what's inside the speakers, which would be my horns, for example, inside the speakers is another transformer, and with the transformer inside the amplifier, it also sets output, allows a certain has a maximum output of wattage, and in this case 250 watts. Yes, that's a lot of power. These things put out 250 watts. So you can have a lot of speakers in that. The more watts, the more speakers you can have, and if you want more speakers, you have to put a lower tap. And what a tap is on a transformer is that inside these, there's 8 different taps. Because this one's multi-voltage. This one go from 25, 70, and 100 volt. So you have your tap numbers. It's selected by a little screw potentiometer thingy right there. When you turn it, it goes to it selects a number. And on this chart here, you have your wattage. So that tells you how much watts it's going to use at its maximum. So if you're going to run a lot of speakers, you're going to put a lower wattage. And inside that speaker, again, is another transformer using that amount of watts as the tap on that voltage, putting it back to whatever resistance, the speaker's rated for. I've took apart one of these for a broken one because we needed to replace the transformer. And guess what? These are actually 8 ohm speakers. So the amplifier takes the 8 ohm, puts it to a 70 volt, and then puts it back to 8 ohms. So it's really stupid. You could just run 8 ohm direct to this thing and hack that and take the transformer out. So you don't really need that thing. But that's in big buildings, because this was used in an older stack of shelf, so it was pretty big. So that's how these work. And also, one thing about wiring these in series parallel, that's what I was talking about in series, that you can put a bunch of these on the same line. That's the one thing about voltage. It does not hurt the amplifier, because it's a voltage. It's not a resistance. So it's 2 different things. You're talking resistance and voltage. Voltage was designed to allow you to put speakers in series, so you wouldn't have to have separate amplifiers for each channel. So when that came out, then it was easier for supermarkets to have speakers all over the place without damaging their amplifier and having to buy a new one every single time the frickin' thing broke. So that is my tutorial on how this, and I'm sorry if this was a frickin' 7 minute long video. Ugh. Sorry, I have the don't know what I'm saying disease right now. And yep. And these, it's easy, it's just going. I took the power bar off. But that just looks complicated. I don't even know what to do. And yeah. These work, I've seen them work, but it's only because they're not loud enough. So, basically, yeah. That's my video on how this works. So, yeah. And then, if they're rack mount, you'd buy a rack mount. In this case, this was an Atlas rack mount. And yep. I'd like to be getting some more pieces, and I'd like to ask about the more rack for my grandpa. So I can put them all down the side here, and I'd get something that's about this big here, and I could stick a whatever you call it. You know, there actually is a screw right here. Yeah. I can feel the rack under here. Anyway, that's it. Bye-bye.